So speaking of other benefits, as Tim mentioned earlier, there's a number of different levers that you can pull on a lease to adjust the payment, to get that payment to a place that your customer can actually afford. In a lease, there are essentially 5, right? On a retail installment sales contract, you've got basically 4. The first one is your agreed upon value of the vehicle. The agreed upon value is the retail price, if you will, right? That's just the leasing term for it, as Tim mentioned earlier. This is a snapshot off of a dealer who does leasing from a couple weeks ago. It's a 2015 Ford Focus with, 83,000 miles on it. And you can see his quote-unquote agreed upon value there would be $11,977 if he was to do a lease on that. Some of you might look at that and say, that seems a little low in today's world, and there is a reason for that. As Tim mentioned, there are additional fees that can be rolled into a lease contract. So he has those additional fees in his lease contract. He's able to advertise this price, which makes him highly competitive when he's online. And then when someone opts to go with the lease, then his additional fees come into play, and his total amount financed is going to look like the markup that you would typically see. So he's getting a competitive advantage on advertising, and he's not missing out on any profitability there. The next lever everyone's going to be very familiar with here is term. Same thing on a retail installment sales contract or on a lease contract. But one thing I want everyone to keep in mind, and you're probably very familiar with it already, is when it comes to deep subprime lending or subprime lending in general, the shorter the term, the less the risk, right? The shorter you can have that vehicle out there, the less likely that customer is to have a life event and not be able to make a payment. Also, the shorter the term, the less likely that vehicle is to break down at some point. And we all know that if the vehicle breaks down, customers are not going to make their payment to you. So the shorter you can keep your term, the better. And we'll come back to that in a couple minutes. But the next piece here is the residual value, which is the lever that we have in a lease contract that we do not have in a retail installment sales contract. Residual value, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially a prediction of what that vehicle is going to be worth at the end of the lease term, right? So you're making a bit of a guesstimate. And usually when I talk to somebody about residual value, they say, oh my gosh, in new car lending, new car leasing, isn't that the thing that everyone gets in trouble on? That's put a number of lessors out of business over time. And that's true. In new car leasing, residual value, residual risk is the #1 risk. However, this isn't new car leasing, this is used car leasing. And with dealerships, you guys are uniquely positioned to both mitigate and essentially eliminate residual risk from leasing. And the reason for that, just to give you a quick example, if you have a 36-month lease, you're going to set your residual at 30% as an example. That car goes full term, customer brings the car back. At that point, there's 2 options. One, if you had a purchase option in your lease, they may buy the vehicle for the residual value, in which case you got your full 30% that you set it at. No big deal. If they take option 2, they give you the vehicle back. You take that vehicle, you recondition it, you put it back out on the line, you get another lessee into that. Now that vehicle at this point has depreciated, right? So it's not nearly as expensive as it was 3 years ago. You set a brand new residual value on this new lease, and maybe it's 20% this time. The actual dollar value of that second residual is likely to be $1,500, $2,000, maybe $2,500, maybe $3,000, whatever that number is. By the end of your second lease, if you miss that residual value by $200 or $300 or $500, you've already made $20, $30, maybe more $1,000 on that one vehicle over 5 years, and you missed the residual by $200. So essentially you can eliminate, by being a dealer doing leasing, you eliminate the residual risk from used car leasing. Now in terms of setting the residuals themselves, you want to set your residual as a percentage of the agreed upon value, right? The retail price. Reg M would tell you that it needs to be 10% or greater, but we recommend to all of our dealers that they set it at 20% or greater. And the reason for that is then you run no chance of ever having a judge or a regulator say that that's a disguised retail installment sales contract. So the 20% mark is a good floor. And if you set your floor there, you will never have any issues there. What you do not want to do is set your residual at 0, or as I've seen many times, $1. That is not a lease. That is a installment loan. It has an amount financed, it has a term, and it goes down to 0. That's an installment loan, and that will get you into trouble. So keep your residuals 20% or greater, and keep in mind, as that lever, when you're desking that deal, the lower the residual value, the higher the customer payment. And the higher your residual goes, the lower the customer payment, right? So it's that extra lever that you can work as you're working a deal up. The next lever here is the money factor, or you'll see IRIL. That is the interest rate implicit in the lease, and Tim mentioned it a little bit earlier ago. There is no APR in a lease. There is a money factor or a rent factor. That also means that leases are not subject to usury caps. I would not encourage anyone to make their IRIL exorbitant, but the point is that there is no APR. The way that you can easily calculate a money factor into an interest rate implicit in the lease is by taking the money factor and multiplying it by 2,400. The most common money factor we see is 0.01 times 2,400, 24% is the average interest rate implicit in the lease that we see from our dealers, which will be very common with most buy here, pay here dealers as well. What's also really cool about a money factor or a rent factor is you can actually include additional products in your rent charge. Okay? Now keep in mind, anything that you put in there does need to be disclosed on the lease contract. Back on that itemization page that Tim was showing you, you could put your service contract, you put a $0, maybe you have a loss damage waiver in there, $0. You can actually back in to whatever the monthly amount for that service contract and damage waiver would be, and you can build that into your money factor, or on a weekly or biweekly payment schedule, what have you. And what that creates, of course, is one, value for the customer that they could never get on a retail installment sales contract. It means they are fully covered. It also means they don't need to opt into it the way that they do on a retail installment sales contract. You're not selling them the service contract. It is included as part of your lease. And what it also does is it protects your collateral. You are the lessor, right? You're the owner of this vehicle. It is your collateral. And you want to protect it as best you can, because the more full-term leases you can get out of a single vehicle, the less cars you had to buy and the higher your return on investment is going to be. So there's a number of benefits there by including some of these products in your money factor there. And then the final lever, of course, is the cap cost reduction, which is really your down payment. And that is the same thing with a retail installment sales contract. The more down payment they put down, the lower the monthly payment's going to be. And if you're in a pay-as-you-go sales tax state, that's what you're going to pay your sales tax on, not on the